All right, good afternoon and welcome to another Lunch and Learn. We are joined here by thousands of people on Zoom, so do sign on and come join us. And to the millions who will catch this on YouTube as well, it's an honor and a privilege to have you all here today. So just a little word about this week's Parsha, Parshat Baha'alotcha. It's a long one, not going to lie. In fact, if we just have a look at how many verses there are, it'll keep you entertained for the whole of Shabbat. 136 verses and so many different topics and themes. Starts off with the commandment to Aaron, who's going to be given the privilege, the Kohanim, of lighting the menorah each day. That's how it starts off. And there's a famous idea that the wording of the verse says, Daber el Aaron va'amarta elav, speak to Aaron and say to him, Baha'alotcha et hanerot. We translate it as when you kindle the lamps, when you light the menorah. But the wording that we use, and it's the name of our parasha as well, Baha'alotcha, which doesn't mean when you light the candles. That's not what it means. The word of aliyah, the word of elevation, of rising up, that is the connotation and the essence behind that word of Baha'alotcha. And there's a message over here that when the menorah was lit, he would have to make sure that the flame could stand on its own. That was the lighting that he had to do. He had to make sure that the flame was stable, secure, and enduring. And so all of the people, the rabbis in education, the teachers in education, they always use this as the kind of one of the backdrops to a key educational message, that when we educate people, be it our children, be it our students, the idea or creating leaders for the generation, the idea is that we have to shape people into being able to stand on their own 2 feet, being able to have what they need to be able to take the world on. So that's one of the key messages, one of the key themes that comes out at the beginning of this week's parasha. We also talk about the Leviim, who are consecrated for service, which is one of the backdrops. Keep using that word. I don't like using that word, backdrop, but it's this procedure here is one of the triggering points for the story of Korach coming up in a couple of weeks' time. So there's that in there as well. And we also have Pesach Sheni, people who were impure for the first Korban Pesach. So they wanted the opportunity to bring the sacrifice. They were impure, and so Moses enacts Pesach Sheni. So this isn't just after they come out of Egypt. This is a year later. So they wanted to be able to bring the Korban Pesach, and Hashem lets them bring it 1 month later. And we still have Pesach Sheni to this day. Some people have the custom to eat matzah on Pesach Sheni. There's obviously no problems of chametz, but the remnant of Pesach Sheni still exists. They have the first time that the Jewish people move from Mount Sinai. That comes up in this week's parasha. They also have Vayhi ben Sar Ha'aron. That comes up in this week's parasha, doesn't it? And then towards the end, they have the people who complain. They start kvetching, dissatisfied with having to eat manna the whole time. And that leads on to Hashem sending quails. And he sends so much quails that those who were complaining, they end up getting completely overwhelmed and stuffed on account of having eaten so much. So lots of things to think about, lots of things to talk about. And then the parasha ends off famously with Miriam contracting tzara'at, which as we've said before, we often translate it as leprosy, but it's not really leprosy. It's the spirit. It's a spiritual affliction that manifests itself physically on a person's skin, and the whole camp has to wait for a week while she is quarantined. And once she comes out, once she is free from her quarantine, then the Jewish people are able to move on. So lots of things to read about, lots of things to think about. I'm actually going to put on the Facebook group later, and I'll put the link in the Lunch and Learn group as well. The Koren send out a PDF file each week with the reading of the Torah. And so I've got Beha'alotcha with all of their commentaries and all their little mini essays and things. I'll try and upload that so everyone can see that a little bit later. For those of you who want to tune in tonight, who for whatever reason are not tuning into the quiz, but of course you all are tuning into the quiz, but for anyone who's not, you can tune into the Belmont channel and listen to my very own father give his Devar Torah on this week's parasha. So that's, yeah, contact him for further details if you'd like. So, all right. So, here we go, guys. Lunch and Learn, Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, Chapter 2. Let's get some screen sharing going on the screen. Here we go. All right, everyone should be seeing that right about now. Seem to have lost Paul. I don't know where Paul's gone. Maybe I offended him somehow. Okay, so we've got Pirkei Avot there on the screen. I really wanted to get myself a siddur, but I'll use what I've got here. Okay, so let's go. Some weird happens. Let's hide my floating meeting controls. There we go. All right, so we've been hearing about our 5 rabbis. We've been talking about them over the last few weeks. We have been hearing what some of them had to say. That's what we were doing last week. I think we went through one of them at the very least. And now we come to Mishnah 12, I think. 70, yeah. We keep having this problem, isn't it? Oh, a good eye we talked about last week. The serpent. Okay, yeah. All right, in my notes it's 15. In the Mishnah here it is 11. And in your book it's 17. Okay, so Mishnah 11. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer. Rabbi Yehoshua, who, if we recall a few weeks ago, had said that the most important thing to try and have in your life is to be a good neighbor. Am I on the right one? No, good friend. Chaver tov and chaver ra. So, ayin hara, yetzer hara, sinat habriot, motzin et adam min ha'olam. Anybody want to read that for us in English? Over here, Rabbi Joshua.
Joshua said, an evil eye, the evil inclination and hatred for humankind puts a person out of the world.
That's right. So, Rabbi Joshua, we had said a couple of weeks ago, he said that you have to be a good companion, and the opposite of that is to be a bad companion, a bad friend. So his words this week: the evil eye, the evil inclination, and baseless hatred for humankind remove a person from the world. What do we think, guys? I see we've got some new players on today. Good to see you, sir. Audience participation is encouraged. So what do we think?
Well, it's still, in the current situation in America, it just shows it's still relevant today.
100%. A very astute point. So let's. So we're all in agreement. It's a good point. So let's try and pick it apart a little bit and see what we have to say. So the words of our Mishnah again: Ayin hara. An evil eye. We have to understand what an evil eye is. Yetzer hara, the evil inclination. We might have heard that terminology before, but let's try and understand what that is. Sinat habriot, hatred for creation, hatred for creatures, for humankind. Motziin et ha'adam min ha'olam, they take the person out of the world. So let's take a little look over here.
My grandmother used to have that saying, or on that
which is quite relevant to the evil eye. You know, if you got something new, you would give me something red. So it's keep the evil eye away.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
That's somebody else's jealousy. I think, and that means it comes from being jealous of other people only.
Exactly. You know, exactly that, or nothing bad happening, or on that subject.
I think they were
Very
superstitions.
Superstition, absolutely.
They used to put a red bundle, you know, around the neck of the newborn of a baby.
Yes.
Well, I even did it right till then, because they used to think the red would keep away the evil eye.
Correct. Yeah.
From the baby.
Yeah. So.
I think an evil eye means only seeing the bad in people, not the good, I would think.
Yes.
Very good.
It's good in everybody.
Yes.
Somewhere.
So for the Mishnah to say, for Rabbi Yehoshua to say that it takes a person out of the world, there's a very strong link between these three things as being corrosively toxic and poisonous for a person's soul. You know, we have to understand what it means to motzi'in et ha'adam min ha'olam, to take a person out of the world. But some of the ways in which this could be understood is, number one, a person's life could literally be threatened from embodying these characteristics. You know, the anxiety and sickness and threat to life that can come from looking at the world from a negative viewpoint, from hating people and living a life with that hatred inside of you, succumbing to every Yetzer hara, to every inclination and temptation that comes your way. So it can bring about, God forbid, premature death. So it can literally take a person out of the world from leading a life that is rooted and founded in those three character traits. To understand a little bit about what they are, an ayin hara. So from a superstitious point of view, you know, we talk about ayin hara as this kind of, you give someone the evil eye. You can impact a person's life just from the thoughts that you have about another person. And you can injure them, you can cause harm to them, you can cause ruin and loss to them through the way in which you might look at them. I used to go to an Ayin Hara lady in Jerusalem many years ago. She was a Moroccan Sephardi lady who lived in Jerusalem. She was an absolutely amazing lady. She had a small apartment near to Mea Sharim, and she would collect deliveries during the week of fruits and vegetables and eggs and all these different things, and she would distribute them on a Thursday night and Friday to over 500 people in her local area. Absolutely just full of chesed. She would go to the markets and collect all of the produce that was left over that day. She would get people delivering and dropping all this stuff. She would have a fleet of seminary girls and other volunteers who would come each week to help divide it all up and put them into the families that were collecting. They would divide it all up into people's I don't know what you'd call them, like the shopping trolleys. There we go, shopping trolley, but not like supermarket shopping trolleys. What are the ones that you put along with you, like the satchels on wheels? I don't know. Anyway, well, there must be a name for them. An amazing woman. She was Sephardi. Her husband was somebody also. I think he's still alive. She's not, unfortunately. He was writing books on Kabbalah. You know, very, very special couple. And she did a procedure which took away ayin hara from people, and it was a very spooky thing. It's, as I said, it's rooted in Kabbalah. She had permission from great rabbis to be able to do this thing. It wasn't just, I mean, people might look at it and say it's all just nonsense, but my feelings are that it's not nonsense. And the procedure was she would melt lead in a small pot, and then she would pour that lead into another pot of water, which she would hold over your head. So she would pour it all in. The lead would drip into the thing, would go like that, and it would solidify into a solid piece of lead, and then she would read the lead and pinpoint who it was that was giving you ayin hara. And she used to show us what she could see. So she'd do this thing, she'd take out the clump, and you'd see like all these little bubbles and notches and different shapes, and then she'd be able to read it. And you know, just to give you a couple of just interesting spooky things. So the first time I went to see her, my friend took me just before I got married, and you know, the idea being that you kind of like wipe the slate clean before going to the chuppah. And so first of all, before she did the process, she was just talking to me, getting to know me a bit, and she was asking about my wife. Well, I say she was asking about my wife. She was telling me about my wife. She said, your wife is one of 5 girls. I was just like, yeah. And her parents do a lot of chesed, and her father always smiles a lot, and her grandfather's very she wasn't asking me about her family. She was telling me about the family. It was the most astonishing thing. And I remember one time we went to visit her. We were living in Hale. We had difficulties with the house that we were living in and the landlord, who was a Sikh fellow. And she did the process, and she takes out the clump and she starts to say, "Are you having problems with the owner of your house?" And we said, "Yes." And she said, "Does he wear a turban?" And I said, "Yes." So she shows me what she can see, and she shows me that she sees these 2 pillars, which you could see quite clearly, and which she said represents the doorway of the house. And she said she can see a man with a turban standing in the doorway, chazak, like this, trying to hold on to the house. And it was just the most bizarre experiences that we had with her. And then she would say different prayers and tefillot to kind of take away the ayin hara. So don't know why I shared that with you, but pardon me?
Did it do any good?
Well, you do end up feeling that you feel this like weight coming off your shoulders, and I mean, we ended up moving from that house into a different house, but the problems, as it were, that we had, it was just crazy to think what power people's thoughts and people's perceptions and people's you know, feelings can actually, they can impact you in physical ways. So so how this links in with being a bad friend, let's think about this for a second. Does a good friend really look at their friends in a negative light, in a poisonous, toxic way? Yetzer hara, the hedonistic instinct for self-gratification. You know, a person who is absorbed in addictive pursuits, be it materialistic pursuits in the way of money and property and power and glory, be it succumbing to temptations with regards to alcohol and drugs and these kinds of things. They can have devastating consequences, and the tendency to hate each other, that's not going to make you a good friend either. So, you know, these 3 things, you become bad news for everyone in your vicinity, for everyone around you. You just attract negativity and you give off negativity. It's not good for anybody to be around. Ayn hara also gets understood to mean jealousy, as Martin was saying before. Maimonides interprets it as stinginess. Maimonides also looks at sinat habriot, the hatred of people, as wanting to be alone, hating company. That's not good for a person either. That literally removes you from the world because you're taking yourself out of human interaction, which isn't a good thing either. So that's some of the things that we talk about in this Mishnah. There's another angle to this as well, which is that these three things are kind of the negative flip sides to the three pillars that we've talked about previously: Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chasadim. Learning Torah, divine service, and acts of kindness. So these three things are interpreted by one commentator called the Tiferet Yisrael, who says that an evil eye means having evil views that contradict the Torah. So he sees that as a contradiction to the pillar of Torah. Yetzer hara, to succumb to your temptations, will impede your divine service. So he sees that as the flip side to avodah. And if you hate people, you're not going to do chesed for them, and you're not going to do acts of kindness for them. So that's the flip side to the third pillar of Gemilut Chasadim. So a few things to reflect on in that Mishnah. Do people have questions or comments before we move on to another one?
I just want to make sure, put a person out of the world. It doesn't mean die or kill in this instance, does it?
Well, we've said that it can lead to that. That was one of the earlier things that we said. It doesn't have to mean literally kill someone, but a person who becomes embroiled in self-destructive temptations, behaviors, and attitudes, that can lead to a premature death. A person who is filled with anxiety and paranoia and depression, there's no telling where those feelings can lead to.
Rabbi, if I could look at the extremes of what you're talking about are, to some extent, mental illness.
Yeah.
Surely it's more looking at people who can control what is going on in their mind. You can change somebody who thinks, I've met people who seem to be jealous or take a negative attitude at some time. It's not a mental illness, it's just the way they are. But that does take them out of the world. It doesn't kill them, but they're not enjoying what Hashem has given us.
Absolutely.
So it's removing them from the pleasures.
If you get so consumed...
You have to be very careful with people who have a real underlying mental difficulty that need help. They're not evil people. They're people who need medical help.
100%.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not calling them evil.
Sorry. I know what I'm saying is there's something before the extreme.
Yes.
And it's not pleasant. It's people who are quite rational, but they look at the bad in everybody, or they want to fight everybody in shul or fight everybody in government.
Yeah.
They can't actually take a pragmatic view of things.
Yeah. So even if their life is not physically ending from this world, they're taking themselves out of normality, of being able to live as part of society, and all those things.
Enjoying the benefits of this amazing world we live in.
It's like addictions. If they're addicted to gambling or drinking, well, they're going to ruin their lives and they may kill themselves and
That's
everybody else. But if they're addicted, it is a sort of illness again.
Motziin et Adam min ha'olam. To take yourself out from the world, there's the angle as well that you just can't enjoy the world. Yeah. You're not in it. You don't have a place in it because you're not tapping into what that world has to offer. You're in some other kind of plane. Yeah.
They may be pushed out by society and shunned.
Yes.
By what they do.
Although,
then further out of the world, don't they?
Pardon me?
Then if they, as Peter just said, then they'll get further out of the world. The more they
Pushed out.
push down,
Yeah.
more pushed down.
So there we go. Positive influences, people. Take some control. All right. So are we ready to move on to another Mishnah then?
Yeah.
Claudia, has your camera frozen? On my screen, it looks like you're not moving very much. And by the lack of answer, I think that she's not there. You're on twice actually. Did you get disconnected?
Had bandwidth last couple of days, so I do keep freezing, dropping it.
Okay, I'm sorry for that. Yeah, you were just on my screen twice there. All right, so let's move on to the next Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi Omer. I'll read it in the Hebrew and then we can have it in English. Yehi mamon chavercha chaviv alecha keshelach. V'hatkein atzmacha lilmod Torah she'ena yerusha lach. V'chol ma'asecha yihiyu l'shem shamayim. Go for it. Let's have the English, someone.
Rabbi Yosef says, let your friend's possession be as dear to you as your own. Make yourself fit to study Torah, for it will not be yours by inheritance, and let your actions be for the sake of the name of heaven.
Okay, so as a backdrop to this, Rabbi Yossi had told us that one should aspire to be a good neighbor, and at all costs to not be a bad neighbor or an evil neighbor. So that is that was his contribution, if we remember, to the question of what is the right path in life to pursue, to be a good neighbor. Now he's telling us to let people's property be as precious to you as your own, make yourself fit to study Torah, and let your actions be for the sake of heaven. What do we think, guys?
They don't seem connected, do they?
Okay.
Could it be that you can inherit, that possessions come to you, but you have to work to study Torah?
So the inheritance point is talking about the Torah itself, not talking about people's possessions.
What about the word property? What are we defining that as?
Ah, very good. So actually the Hebrew word there, mammon, is usually used in the context of money.
Right.
But it's also in the context of people's goods, their items, the things that they own. Apparently we have...
Is it a jealousy thing?
The Torah tells us that we have to, if you see a donkey fallen, your neighbours or your enemies, you have to help it. I think it's saying that you have as much responsibility for your neighbour's possessions as you do for your own.
Mm-hmm.
Respectful.
Yeah, and don't damage them. And if they're not there and somebody wants to steal them, then you have an obligation to ensure they don't. Is that it? Or look, you have an obligation to look after them, I should think.
So you actually give an opinion akin to that of the Meiri, who says that if you see your friend's ship about to capsize or his house is about to burn down, then you have to go and save it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's definitely.
Unless it's Shabbos we learned the other day.
Is it actually tangible property? Is it tangible property, or is property a more generic word?
I think it's quite broad, really. What kind of things do you have in mind?
I wasn't thinking about property as in property that a person owns, but more as the person in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, rather sort of reflects back on other things we've said about the other person should be as important to you as you are to yourself, although I'm not sure I actually mean that, but it's not about property, it's about the person as a whole. It's
perhaps one could say
a holistic person.
Perhaps one could say that if I have to have a degree of consideration for their property, how much more so would I have to have a degree of consideration for themselves as people?
Yeah, a holistic approach.
Yeah, I mean, if this is the starting point, then anything above that, I mean, we call that in Hebrew kal v'chomer. If I have to look after their property, then kal v'chomer, I would have to look after them as a person. How much? All the more so, I would have to look after them as a person. Yeah.
Okay.
So I agree with your sentiment. So there's a few things. There's a few things that we can say about this. First of all, is this idea of being a good neighbor. So it seems like Rabbi Yossi is saying to us that being considerate for one's property is the essence of being a good neighbor. If people in your shchuna, in your neighborhood, in your road, in your apartment building, whatever it is, if they know that they can rely on you, to leave a spare set of keys in your house, or to open the door for a workman if they can't be in at the time, or to take a delivery for somebody else. All of these things are part of being a good neighbor. Someone dependable, someone that they can trust, someone that they know is not going to play loud music till silly o'clock in the morning and disturb others. So it's all part. It's all part and parcel of being a good neighbor. There's
I think what we've gone through recently fits into this perfectly.
I've been noticing that more and more there's so much of what's going on recently that fits in each week to
absolutely.
to the way that we're all living. It's amazing.
There's people are doing things, whether it's for the NHS or whether it's for a neighbour or whether it's for their own family. Everyone's pulled together, and as far as I think, and I think everybody would agree, it brings out the good in people. It really has.
Yeah, 100%.
It really has.
And afterwards, let's hope it carries on now.
I hope so, because it has been very noticeable.
Yeah.
It really has.
You might like this next point as well, Ashley, because I haven't written down here who says it, but one of the ways of looking at this as well is that we should be taking care not to criticize other people's property or other people's merchandise. So to have an attitude of wanting and caring about other people's property, all these people that get online where they go to a restaurant or they go to a shop and they have a negative experience and then they post it on Facebook or TripAdvisor or things like this, that would be perhaps the opposite of considering someone else's property, their reputation, their Ashley would never want someone to come in and write online that they went into Kelman's Deli and they got treated like X, Y, and Z, and or I bought the chicken and it was a bit icky. We would never. Pardon me?
We had a scenario a few months ago when this first kicked started happening, and something started on Facebook, which is something I am dead against. I've said it for years. If you've got a problem, speak to the owner.
Yeah.
Speak to the manager. This particular lady jumped on the bandwagon, and then all of a sudden, half an hour later, she arrived in the shop. And I went, "Excuse me," I said, "I just want to explain what this gentleman was talking about, right?" So I explained to her, and I said to her very politely, I said to her, "Now," she said, "Thank you for explaining to me, and now I understand," right? I said, "And secondly, I would like you, please, very nicely, to put it correct on the social media." I said, "Because I don't like all that." I said, "You come in here, I've explained it to you." And I said, "If you did that in the first place," I said, or just generally, things like that won't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I put her straight, and she did. She stood in the shop, and she did it standing in the shop. And she thanked me profusely, and she left happy. So, all these social media things can be great, but on the flip side, they can ruin businesses.
Yeah.
Which is, like you say, it's a reputation of somebody.
It's horrible to be on the receiving end on that, but please God, if everybody was to take steps to behave in more appropriate ways, we can only hope that the outgrowth would be that it would influence others. You know, that's what we've seen with this whole you know, social distancing and the quarantining and everything like that. You know, we all understand how important it is to live our lives like that, but it's frustrating when we try and then we see others not doing it and we think like, oh well, maybe I'll just throw it in as well. You know, gloves are off. It's one of the biggest challenges of all of this is maintaining the same attitude and commitment even when others around you are not, and even when you feel direct repercussions of that as well. Rita, I'm sorry I cut in on you there.
No, that's all right. I just wanted to reply to Ashley. Once it's in writing, that's it. And that's the reason why after 10 or 12 years we came out of Facebook. We don't want to go in it. We keep away from Facebook.
No,
you know, the new family have got apps and that's it. But once it's in writing, that's it.
It's all to do with people's behaviour.
Yeah, it's impossible to delete this stuff, unfortunately. It always exists somewhere.
Absolutely. You can deal with it, you know, fair enough. Nip it in the bud, as they say.
Yeah.
I would tend to add to that worse still is verbal pronunciation, because you don't know where it's gone, you don't know how it's been explained and gone on and exaggerated. However bad, and it is bad, I mean, some of the, not everything, but some of the things that are put on are not acceptable. But I think it's just as bad, let me say, if people spread rumour and say bad things. I mean, it's all against the Torah precept. It's a very difficult, I'm sure Rabbi would explain that Lashon Hara is the worst thing of all, because you don't know how it's exaggerated. But it's a very fine line. Where do you, if you know something bad about somebody and they're about to marry them, do you have an obligation to say, or
you have an obligation to find? You have an yeah, you have an obligation to find the right person to talk to.
Yeah.
But you don't have an obligation to go on Facebook and start posting it on Facebook, and you don't have an obligation to tell people outside the circle that don't need to know. My wife loves this story. We used it. She used it a couple of weeks ago in the newsletter. That there are these two girls sitting on a bus, and they're talking about how this girl has just got engaged, and they're talking about like, I don't understand how did these two get together? What did he see in her? I mean, doesn't he know about what she used to be like when we were in seminary together? And does she not know, you know, what she gets up to and who her friends used to be and what she was like in high school and blah, 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 blah. And then this woman in front of them turns around on the bus, says, thank you so much. I happen to be that boy's mother, and we didn't know this about her. So I'm going to go now and tell him that he should break off the engagement. And they sit there like, no, we didn't mean it like that. It was just she's actually a really lovely girl. And then she turned around to him and said, listen, you should know I'm not actually his mother, but if I was, then you'd have just ruined any chance of them having happiness. Pardon me?
I said, what a wonderful, and it shows it does. I had a similar thing. I was sitting on a bus and somebody came on from the shore who looked very bedraggled. And the people beside said, look what he looks like. Somebody behind them said, well, you should see the parents. And it made it know who was sitting there.
You never know who's around. You never know. You never know who you're talking to.
So, so these things are corrosive and these things are dangerous, and 100% we should eradicate it from our lives and from society. So there's actually a couple of nice stories. I was trying to look for the names because we Shira and I did a session on this a couple of weeks ago, but two really lovely stories. There was a guy in Lakewood, New Jersey, who saved somebody thousands and thousands of dollars. He saw one evening that someone had posted on Amazon. They were selling, they had a stock of 40 iPads to sell, or something like that, and he was selling them for $40 a piece. And so this guy puts on his iPads. He goes to sleep. He wakes up the next morning. He discovers every single one of the iPads has been sold, and he thinks that's great, but that's a little bit suspicious. So he looks into it, realizes he posted them at $40, and he's just made a sickening loss, because clearly one person has gone in, realized that he sold them for $40 and snapped all of them up, and he's just made a killer loss. He was meant to do it for $400, and now he's lost everything. Then he finds a message in his inbox from a guy in Lakewood who has bought all of these iPads. He had noticed that the username sounded Jewish, because the username on Amazon was something like LY Badichev. So this guy had seen the seller's username, LY Badichev, figured it was Lazy Yitzchak Badichev, and decided the guy must be Jewish, decided that he must have made an error and posted them for $40. So he bought all of them with the full intention of cancelling his order. And in that way, he managed to save this guy thousands and thousands of dollars of loss. So that was one story. So that would be an example of someone else's possessions being as dear to you as your own, realizing when someone is in shtuk that you've got a way of helping them out and saving them. And then the second story, which inspired me, there was a guy, I can't remember where he lived, but probably New York. He had bought an office desk secondhand online, and he had discovered when he was going through the desk that the previous owner had left an envelope with $96,000 in cash.
Wow.
Inside the desk.
You think you'd have known this?
And he gave it back to the woman. He said it wasn't even a question for him. He appeared on like national what they called chat shows. He appeared on chat shows because of this.
I think the tax revenue would be very interested.
Well, it was her savings and whatever it was, but he said live on national TV, he said it never even occurred to him to keep the money for himself.
Rabbi, in the first story,
yeah.
Would it make any difference if the guy was Jewish or not?
I was just going to ask the same question.
You mean if he had noticed it, would he have still gone ahead and bought them and then given them back? I'm not in the guy's head, so I've got no idea.
The question, David, I was going to ask the same question.
I would love to say that if he had noticed that that it was a clear error, that he would have done it for anybody. I've just got no idea, because that's not how the story goes. Maybe non-Jewish people don't make those mistakes on Amazon. I don't know. But
Maybe they do.
Maybe they do. I can't speak for the guy. The question is, would we do it? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. Would we do it?
Can't possibly make any difference whether the bloke was Jewish or not.
No, the story ended up panning out the way it did because the guy was Jewish. That's all. I'm not saying the halacha is different for a non-Jew. I'm just saying I can't speak for the guy if he would have done it for a non-Jew, because that's not what happened in the story. Gary first, then Peter.
Does the following fall into this category where let the property of your fellow is as precious to you as your own? If you were to lose something, you'd hope it would be returned to you. So if you find somebody's property, you make a special effort to return it to them.
100%. Do to others what you had done to you.
And is it also incumbent upon us to have, if we have something valuable that might be lost, to have some sort of contact details so if somebody was to find it? Is it incumbent on the person that might lose it?
It will depend what that item is. It's not always possible.
I mean, sometimes something is.
You can't walk around with a label on your wedding ring to say, if you happen to find this, please drop it back to thingy. But you would certainly hope that if, God forbid, your wedding ring dropped, that someone would make an effort to get it back to you.
I'm just wondering if it's incumbent upon the person to have some sort of contact details on something that's precious. Even a wedding ring, as you say, if it was engraved inside with the postcode.
What did you mean? I think the Torah says quite not one of the Mishnah says quite categorically that if something has identifiable marks on it, you have an obligation to go out of your way to return it.
That's right.
If it has nothing that's identifiable, then it has very little value, then you don't have to pursue too much.
And by the way, there's also a process as well. If you were to find something that, if you were to find 20 quid on the floor, and there was a way for you to announce that you found someone's 20 quid, so there's ways of doing it. One shouldn't necessarily publicise that they found 20 quid, because then anybody could come running to you and say, oh yeah, I lost 20 quid. But we should start off by saying things along the line of, I happen to find some money on the street outside Kelman's Deli. If you think it belongs to you, then give us a call, and then someone will call you up and they'll say, yeah, I lost some money. Oh, how much did you lose? Oh, I lost £20. Oh, well, I happen to find £20, so here you go. But so there is a process as well of being able to do these things.
And if somebody doesn't own up, you put it into a charity, or you should do. I would do. Done it before.
You're an honest guy, Ashley.
No, you've got honestly,
For the avoidance of any doubt, ladies and gentlemen, Ashley Kelman is an extremely honest person.
Ask the question. No, but honestly, no.
And he's a fantastic deli owner as well.
No. Talk to do with my wife. Blame her. It's her fault. No, but it's true. If no one hasn't come in or then, you put it into charity.
Peter, what were you going to say, Peter?
I was going to say that the first story is very commendable about cancellation of the order, except for the fact we'd end up with a great big bill from PayPal. So,
well, actually, he did. He wrote to the guy. He said, either I can cancel my order, but then you run the risk of having negative feedback. So let's process the order, and then I'll refund you the money. And that's what we ended up doing, actually. Or maybe it was the other way. I can't remember. Whichever way didn't besmirch his name on Amazon, that was the way that he did it. Okay, so a couple of other things in our last few minutes over here. So there's an angle to this as well. To be happy for other people's successes, not to rue the day that you couldn't have what they have. That's an attitude perspective as well when it comes to these things. To actually be happy for people when they succeed in business and when they make a big sale or whatever it might be. That can be a challenge for some people. There's a story in the Talmud about somebody who left chickens with Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, or one chicken perhaps it was. And so Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa looked after the chicken, and that chicken laid eggs, and those eggs gave birth to more chickens, and then he looked after all of those chickens, and then he was finding that he was accumulating all these chickens and all these eggs, and it was just getting unmanageable for him. So he sold them all and bought a goat instead. And when the owner came back to because he realized he'd left his chicken, Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa said, look, I actually had your investment and I've multiplied the value several fold, and here's the goat to show for it. So there's an attitude as well of taking people's investments seriously, their property seriously, making the efforts to look after it if that's what's at stake over there, or just to be happy with what other people have. And that can be a difficult thing. If you don't have and someone else does have, then people have a tendency to be jealous, to wish they had it. That's the evil eye coming back into play again, perhaps. So so that all gets talked about. We've got a couple of minutes left. If we want, we can just finish off this Mishnah. So we also read in the words of the Mishnah. Let's get it back up again. Let the property of your fellow be as precious to you as your own. Make yourself fit to study Torah, for it will not be yours by inheritance. So what this seems to be telling us is that even though we have a phrase, a verse in the Torah, Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kilat Yaakov. In fact, it's one of the earliest verses that we teach children. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe morasha kilat Yaakov. Moses taught us the Torah. It's the inheritance of Kehilat Yaakov, of the community of Jacob. So, which one is it? You have to make yourself fit to study Torah, because it will not be yours by inheritance, but it is ours by inheritance, because we have a verse that says that it's an inheritance. So which is it? Is it an inheritance or is it not an inheritance? And the answer is, it's an inheritance for the whole Jewish people, but you're only going to take a share in it if you want to. So morasha, a Yerusha is an heirloom, it's a legacy, it's there for the taking. It becomes a Masorah, it becomes something that you become part of the chain once you actually seize it and once you actually actively take a role in it. One of the ways in which the commentaries talk about this is, you might think that if you're born into a family of rabbis, that you yourself just automatically acquire that wisdom, right? And that's not the case. That's not the case. You can be born into a family of great Torah sages, but unless a person actively takes an interest in Torah, the values that it represents, the performance of the mitzvot, that's not going to come automatically. You don't become a rabbi or a righteous person just by being born into a family like that. It has to be an active acquisition. There's an amazing parable that I came across when I was looking into this, which is, if you imagine a father leaving behind an inheritance. So this guy is super duper rich, and he leaves behind tons and tons of things to be divided up, and the children all come together, and the the executor of the will, whoever's reading out the will and divvying everything up, so they go through the will, and he describes all of the things that the father is leaving behind, and then he says, but you're going to need to get some boxes and suitcases and things to be able to carry all of these jewels and all these coins and whatever else away. And they're like, what, he didn't leave us anything to carry this stuff away? And then the guy says back, no, if you want to be able to have this stuff, you've got to come ready, prepared with your boxes and your suitcases to be able to take it all away. And the message is that we've been given the jewel of Torah, the wisdom that it embodies, but the only way we're going to be able to take any of it is if we have a receptacle that is there to receive it. If we are people that are able to accept the Torah and accept the wisdom that's in the Torah, otherwise there's nothing we can do. So that's what the mission is saying. You have to ready yourself and prepare yourself to be able to learn Torah, because it's not just going to come naturally. It's not just going to magically appear in your head. There has to be a level of investment and activity to be able to get those things. And finally, the final point: let all your actions be for the sake of heaven. What a wonderful aspiration! So some of the things that I saw when I was looking into this is that a lovely quote: make sure your sake of heaven is for the sake of heaven. Meaning, many people convince themselves that they do things for the sake of heaven, and you can end up with zealotry, and you can end up with extremism, and that's because people have drives and considerations and motivations, and they do things and they'll say, oh well, I'm doing it l'shem shamayim, I'm doing it for the sake of heaven, and it could end up being extremely corrupt and extremely violent and extremely inappropriate, and people convince themselves that they're doing the right thing. So we have to make sure that what we call the sake of heaven is actually consistent with the sake of heaven. So that's one angle to it. Another angle as well is that Judaism teaches us that we can take the most mundane activities and turn them into things for the sake of heaven. So when we make a bracha, all we're doing is just eating a sandwich, but when we make a bracha over that sandwich, or that bracha over that drink of water or that drink of coffee, so we are eating and drinking for the sake of heaven. We are doing it with Hashem in mind. When we go to the gym, you could say, well, that's just a waste of time. Well, that depends. If you're exercising to be able to have vitality and strength and vigor to do other things and to be able to do more mitzvot, then your exercise is for the sake of heaven. If you're sleeping so that you have strength the next day to be able to do more mitzvot, your sleeping is for the sake of heaven. And even one of the commentaries picks up on, levity and lightheartedness. If we have sources that talk about how we shouldn't be comedians and we shouldn't mock and we shouldn't take life so frivolously, but yet if we're doing that to cheer someone up, we're doing that to make to improve someone's life, that's for the sake of heaven as well. We're doing these things with lofty aspirations and not because we're just succumbing to temptations and living solely for ourselves. So therefore the things that we do, even if we say that they are l'shem shamayim, we should check that they should really be l'shem shamayim. So we'll leave that for today. Please God, we should all live life as it should be lived. I wish everybody a wonderful day, a meaningful day, and a Shabbat Shalom for when it comes. We'll see you again on Lunch and Learn.